Welcome, everyone. My name is Richard Albert. I'm professor of world constitutions at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm a founding co-editor of this blog, iConnect. And today I'm joined by three of my colleagues, two of my fellow co-editors, for a new series on constitutionalism in Latin America and the Caribbean, published by Hart. And we're going to launch today the first book published in the series. Let me just say a word about the series. We seek to publish outstanding scholarship on the law and politics of the many varieties of constitutionalism in Latin America and the Caribbean. This includes single jurisdiction studies, cross-national studies, as well as inquiries between the relationship constitutional law and international law in the multi-level legal orders in the region. We welcome inquiries about your ideas and whether it would fit into the series. You can contact me directly, Richard Albert, or one of my two series co-editors. First, Carlos Bernal, who is a constitutional law professor at the University of Dayton, formerly a constitutional court judge in Colombia, and now a recently elected commissioner on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Carlos would be happy to hear from you if you have proposals for a book in the series. And of course, our third co-editor, Professor Catarina Santos Botelho, who is a professor of constitutional law and chair of constitutional law at the Catholic University of Portugal in beautiful Porto. Catarina as well would love to hear from you if you have ideas for books in the series. But today, we're gathering to discuss the first book in the series, Constitutional Erosion in Brazil, published by Professor Emilio Meyer at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. Emilio is also a research fellow in the Brazilian National Council for Scientific and Technological Development. Good to see everyone. Carlos, good to see you. Catarina, good to see you. Emilio, good to see you, and congratulations. You know, I love looking at the book because what a beautiful cover. I think Hart, I shouldn't say this too loud, but Hart has the best covers around. And let me put in a plug for our series commissioning editor, Kate Wetter, who's really helped to put this together and is the driving force behind it all. She's really magnificent. Emilio, we want to have a conversation with you about the themes in the book, about the impetus for the book, and also about your experiencing publishing in the series and with Hart. So let's just begin. And I want to begin, Emilio, with the title of your book, Constitutional Erosion in Brazil. I want to ask about the first two words, constitutional erosion. How do you situate this concept of constitutional erosion, this phenomenon, in the larger constellation of ideas and concepts that we've seen written about in the field in the past decade? My colleague and founding co-editor of this blog, David Landau, has written about abusive constitutionalism, for example. Kim Lane Shepley has written about autocratic legalism. Tom Daly has written about democratic decay. I've written about constitutional dismemberment. Where does this idea of constitutional erosion fit into this landscape of ideas, all related to democratic decline?
First of all, Richard, thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss with the very editors of this series, you, Professor Bernal, and Professor Catarina. It's a joy for me to be here with you today. Richard, what I thought about was that we had several and different forms of analyzing a wave that was taking place after the 2010s throughout the world. So this was not just a problem for Brazil. I think that most of the colleagues that read the iConnect blog know that we face situations of, let's say, democratic decay, to use a concept that was created by Professor Tom Daly, to describe what was going on in Poland, Hungary, Brazil, India, several countries in the world that faced situations in which the quality of democracy was deteriorating. And then what I tried to do is to describe what was going on specifically in Brazil, which seemed to be a case that was beyond those that were discussed by comparativists throughout the world. So Brazil has several features and characteristics that demand a specific analysis. And then for me, most of those concepts were worried about situations that were directly linked to, let's say, a notion of liberal democracy, which is truly important and which is affected now in Brazil. But the problem in Brazil is that we had other features, let's say, probably more substantial, that were defined by the 98 Constitution and that were subject to attacks throughout, through different, actually, measures in the recent years. So what I try to show is that constitutional erosion, which is a concept that dialogues a lot with the idea of democratic erosion defended by our colleagues Tom Ginsburg and Aziz Hook, is a situation in which the constitutional identity of a specific jurisdiction is affected by a process that is detrimental, that takes a longer time to be elaborated, to be even diagnosed. And it is different from a situation of a collapse of democracy. So what I try to do is not to create something truly new, but to use other concepts that could be useful to show what is taking place in situations such as the Brazilian one, the Mexican one, the Indian one. Maybe Carlos could talk a little bit about it, but the Colombian one, in which we have cases of, let's say, transformative constitutionalism that are prompted by these constitutions and that were affected by new measures from those proto-authoritarian governments, such as the case now, as we see in Brazil.
Thank you so much, Emilio. If I can just follow up on that, how do you describe the situation of infringement or change, alteration in the identity of the Brazilian constitution by means of your concept of erosion?
Well, Carlos, I think that the first thing that the book tries to develop is to try to explain how civil and military relationship in Brazil were not clearly defined or reformed in a better sense after the 1988 Constitution. So something that you wrote about in the past, the processes of transitional justice in Brazil were limited, and the relationship between military and civil authorities was something that was not touched upon. And then what we had is a problem that is related to the current situation in which we can see a militarization of politics in Brazil. Plus, Brazil has diverse problems with inequality. This is one of the things that the 1988 Constitution tried to address through its socio-economic rights and the way by which it tries to, in a certain sense, direct the way by which economic power will be used after the 1988 Constitution. But that was not a problem that was handled or tackled by the diverse governments that we had after 1988. Plus, we have a situation that if we compare the case of Brazil with the cases of Poland and Hungary, where we can see Kurds being captured and then the process taking place with that element. In Brazil, I tried to show that even Kurds had some cooperation in the process of deteriorating the quality of democracy in Brazil in the past, let's say, at least in the past 8 years. And then finally, I think that the idea of rule of law and the way by which rule of law was violated by diverse actors in the political arena is part of a chapter that describes, that I try to describe in the book as something that is a feature specific to Brazil and that would claim a specific way to analyze it.
Emilio, in line with Carlos' question, why not a book about constitutional erosion in the world? I know that you have partially answered this question, but what really inspired the idea for your book?
Probably the problem that this is something that our colleagues in Brazil keep on saying all the time. How it's difficult to teach constitutional law in Brazil now, because all the time you have to show that there is another case which is different and was decided in a different way, or either by our federal Supreme Court, or the way by which members of executive and legislative branches they behaved. And this is something that all the time asked for some explanation. I think that the complexity of the situation in Brazil would demand a specific book. So my idea was to try to show, okay, there is a concept that can be applied to other jurisdictions, and I try to do some exercise of comparative constitutional law throughout the book. But I think that the situation in Brazil demanded, being a huge country, a country that is an important in international relations, is an important player. This would demand a specific study and by someone who lived this situation here in Brazil. As Bolsonaro's government was going on, I thought that this was something that pressed even more for having a specific explanation that I try to perform throughout the book.
So you definitely have set a high bar for future authors. So having successfully published this book and launching the series, do you have any advice for anyone wanting to publish in this hard series?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is to try to do something. At least for me, this was something that when I thought about describing the Brazilian situation, I thought that, okay, this could be an interesting case study. But you need to do all the time an exercise of comparative constitutional law. So I think that every author that wants to publish in the series must not just pay attention to the fact that it must exercise some kind of comparative constitutional law analysis, but most of all show that there is something that involves the Latin America and the Caribbean regions. So I think that this is the most important thing for me, at least in the series, to try to show that I was engaging with the other jurisdictions throughout Latin America, which was something that I tried to do in a certain sense with Chile, with Argentina, and mostly with Peru, because of the political instability that was also haunting that jurisdiction.
Once again, everyone, we're discussing a new book by Emilio Meyer, Constitutional Erosion in Brazil. And I opened the book so you can see both the front and the back, because look at this beautiful cover. Like I said, I shouldn't say this too loudly, but I think Hart has the best covers out there. I have a question, I think, for each of you. Carlos, I'd like to ask you about the series. What are some ideas out there that are ripe for research and writing about that would be a good fit for the series? And Katerina, a question for you. When a scholar proposes a book to us, what is the process like? How are we involved? What do we do? Do we help? Things like this. But first, before I go to you, Carlos, for your answer, and you, Katerina, for your answer, I have a more substantive question for you, Emilio, about the book. You've mentioned constitutional erosion as in Brazil, similar to what's happening around the world, but you focused on Brazil. My question has to do with the constitution of Brazil that is presently being eroded. Is it possible that the erosion happens just by the very nature of the thing being a constitution? We've learned that constitutions have an average lifespan of about 19 years. Brazil's constitution, written and promulgated in 1988, is now what, 34 years old, coming on 35 years old. So maybe it's just a feature or a flaw or the reality of any constitution out there, that it's going to erode after some time and you just have to write a new one. So why not just write a new one, a new constitution for Brazil? And then we'll hear from Carlos and Katerina.
Well, I think that we don't have presently in Brazil, let's say, a popular commotion or people trying to create a debate in the sense that the most adequate answer for our problems now would be to enact a new constitution. I think that probably this is the most important feature today, that people be engaged in creating a new scenario, as we can see now in Chile taking place. And so you think about a democratic procedure, you see that people are thinking that the way out for political crisis is to adopt a new constitution. And this is something that is not taking place even for the most far-right proposal on politics, as you could describe Bolsonaro's government and its supporters. So the substitution of the constitution would be not, at least as we can see the debate here in Brazil now, a way out. But that does not mean that we would stick with the 1980 constitution forever. It is an important constitution. It came from a very democratic procedure. It has a lot of good qualities, but to think about a new constitution, to adopt a new constitution, probably this is not the best solution, at least for now in Brazil. But this is something that does not mean that in the future, in the near future, we cannot come back to the discussion again. What I try to show in the book is that the very 1980 constitution has good answers to defend against this process of erosion. So what I try to show at the end of the book is that, for instance, our federal Supreme Court, which was an actor in this process of erosion, now is more placed like a victim of this process of erosion. So we are now, several scholars in Brazil, organizing ourselves and defending and trying to defend the federal Supreme Court and our other courts that, for instance, oversee our electoral process against the attacks that are prompted by President Bolsonaro, even filing a petition for the UN representative on the independence of judges and lawyers, which is something that shows that, yes, we want to defend this constitution, we want to defend some of the institutions that were created by this constitution against this process of constitutional erosion.
Very interesting. So in this book, Constitutional Erosion in Brazil, I guess part of what you're saying is that when you diagnose the existence of this phenomenon, constitutional erosion, the answer shouldn't be right away to write a new constitution. Perhaps you're also giving advice to future constitution makers to say, hey, you can pre-program into the constitution strategies that help to guard against erosion, that help to keep the constitution resilient and strong and resistant to erosion.
Yes, and you can see that in that case, you have some candidates now in Brazil for the next legislative elections that will take place together with the presidential one, that are trying to propose ways that probably this is not the best concept to describe it, but in a certain sense, in an idea of what Levenstein called militant democracy, to defend Brazilian democracy against attacks to its own very institutions. So this is something important. This is something that the 1988 Constitution tries to create a way and pave a way to other institutions to protect the very 1988 Constitution. And I think that this is the kind of platform that representatives can have for the next years, or even to think about in the future for a new constitutional design.
Well, you've certainly, I think, piqued everyone's interest with your discussion of the book and the ideas in it. Carlos, let me come to you. Do you have any thoughts about subjects, ideas, themes, controversies that today are ripe for someone to write about for a book in this new series published by Hart?
Yes, Richard, thank you so much for this opportunity. I would like to share 4 ideas that I have. The first one is about the following. I know that there is a practice of borrowing constitutional institutions and mechanisms across the Americas, across Latin America and the Caribbean. For instance, just to give you an example, the Colombia Constitutional Court created that concept of unconstitutional state of affairs. That concept was borrowed and applied in Brazil for cases concerning jails, and also in Costa Rica, and now I know that this is going also to be the case in Ecuador. So far, there has not been a study on how that borrowing constitutional institutions or migration or transplantation of institutions is going on in the region. That could be one. Second idea. and now I say this in my capacity as commissioner of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. We talk a lot about inter-American standards, and there is discussion on what are those standards and also how to build them. If we point to the way the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was created, what they thought, what they have in mind was that they need to find a minimum core that is shared by all the countries in the world, and we all can agree upon that core. If that idea that I like very much concerning the Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be transplanted to the Americas, what we should have is like a kind of minimum core concerning all the human rights across the continent. So far, we don't know that is that minimum core. For instance, concerning the rights of the people with disabilities, economic and social rights, freedom of speech, concerning protests, all these topics. It would be very nice to have studies in that area. Then a third point is concerning the relationship between international law and constitutional law in the region, and in particular international human rights law and constitutional law in the region. There is a huge variety of approaches. For instance, the Colombian one and the Brazilian one, which is very generous to international law. The Colombian constitution, for instance, states that all the international human rights treaties are supra-constitutional. And as you know, that is quite different from what happened here in the United States. So we should have studies in that region, in that area, that can help us to understand the difference and contrast between the different approaches in the Americas. And then a final one, I know that artificial intelligence, digital technologies, etc., have begun to be used in many respects in admin law across the region. And this is impacting constitutional rights. And so far, the literature in our region is very poor. This is a new topic, it's a gap. And I think if anyone would like to write about that, that would be a huge success.
Thank you for those ideas. Magnificent. Thank you, Carlos. Katerina, any thoughts you want to share with people who might be interested in submitting a book proposal, or even just submitting an expression of interest to learn more about the production of a book once it is accepted for publication in the series?
So the process to publish a book in our series is a three-layered process. So to begin with, we receive a proposal, and we, the committee, the committee series, we read the proposal, and if we find it promising, we send it to peer review, to blind peer review, and then the proposal is properly reviewed. There are constructive comments. It might be accepted or not accepted, and if it isn't accepted, there is a kind of engagement of the proposal that rewrites some parts or comments on the comments. And so there is also this discussion that is very fruitful for the results. And then a hard publisher also has to decide whether the proposal is viable. But having said that, please do not feel wary of submitting your proposals. Do submit us. We are eager to receive new and more proposals for this series.
That's right. That's right. I want to echo that. And I guess I do want to ask one last question, if I could, back to the main guest for today, who is Emilio Meyer, author of Constitutional Erosion in Brazil. Emilio, congratulations again on this book. I think we're all proud that it's the first in the series, but I have a question. Tell us about Renata, Isabella, and Guido. These are the people to whom you've dedicated this book.
Yeah. So Renata is my wife here in Brazil. So I think that we all know that in those processes of writing books, of being involved with that, we need plenty of time to concentrate and everything else. I think that in a certain sense, COVID-19 pandemic helped a little bit, because I was at home all the time, and but Renata supported me being with Isabella and helping to everything take place here in our home, and I also helping her with her job and everything else. And Isabella is our daughter. She's 6 years old. I don't think she likes too much constitutional law for now. So this is something that probably limits our conversation on topics, on different topics. And finally, Guido, he was my brother. Unfortunately, he died during the pandemic. It was not because of the pandemic, but that was something hard for me in a certain sense, because I needed to deal with that and write the book. But in a certain sense, I thought that, okay, I must dedicate this work to him. He was someone I loved too much. And I think that the result of the book was, in a certain sense, prompted also by what was his life and what it meant to me. But that's it.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, and our condolences to you and your family and loved ones on the loss of your brother. But what a way to honor him, not only in the work that you do, but in the life that you lead. So, Emilio Meyer, thank you very much, and congratulations on this new book, Constitutional Erosion in Brazil. And what a pleasure, I have to say, what a pleasure it is to work with Catarina Santos Botelho and Carlos Bernal, two dear friends, in leading this series. We look forward to more opportunities to read proposals and to publish books in the series, so that all of you can follow along in the path that is now being blazed by Emilio in having written the first book in the series. Thanks to all. Everyone have a good day, a good week, and be well.
Thank you.